right, a big hello and welcome, and thank you all for joining in. On behalf of the Ashank Desai Center for Leadership and Organizational Development, it is a pleasure for me to welcome you all. The Leadership Storytellers is yet another marquee initiative at IIMA Ahmedabad. As we know, this is a platform that brings the ideas and insights of renowned experts to bring forth the most trending leadership issues from a storyteller's lens. And who better to do that for today's session than the inimitable Ravi Venkatesan. Ravi, of course, needs no introduction. Besides all his other stellar achievements and pursuits, Ravi is most recently a celebrated author of the best-selling book, What the Heck Do I Do With My Life? And in conversation with him today are IIM Ahmedabad star professors, Professor Kirti Sharda and Professor Kathan Shukla. A warm welcome to you all, our audience today. You're all encouraged to post your questions on the Q&A. Welcome to Leadership Storytellers, Ravi. The stage is all yours.
Okay. Hi, Piyush. Thank you for that nice introduction. And good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here. I've been a lifelong student of leadership myself. So it's a wonderful opportunity to be here in discussion with like-minded people who share that interest. And thank you to IIMA Ahmedabad for extending this invitation and giving me the chance to talk about some of the themes from my new book. The book is called What the Heck Do I Do With My Life? I'm now going to try and screen share. The book was launched in January and it's done very, very well. And not because it's a particularly excellent book, although I'm biased, but because it's so topical. I think this is a question that is there on every person's mind. Yeah, so what I'm going to do is talk about some of the ideas from the book for about 10, 12 minutes, and then I'll get into conversation with all of you. So look, what is the core idea in the book? The core premise is this, that we have entered a whole new era, a whole new age. And the defining feature of this era is that it is a period of extreme change. And, I keep repeating that the world will change more in this century, this 21st century, than in all of human history. And as the phrase goes, change is the only constant and uncertainty is the only certainty. And, if you think about just for a minute about all that is happening around us, you'll get a sense of what I'm talking about, right? So we're coming out of 2 years of COVID. At least we hope we're coming out of COVID, except the echoes of it are still reverberating. There are still cities in China that are locked down and cases are rising in some parts of the world, like New York. So the echoes will be with us for some time, it looks like. Then you look at what's happening economically. You see that supply chains everywhere are broken. Inflation is at a record high in every country. And the last week has been one of the worst weeks for stock markets all over the world. Probably the second worst week since the financial crisis. Okay, that's not so good. But then what else is going on? Well, there's a giant war raging in Ukraine. And we still don't know how it's going to play out and how it's going to end. And, there's at least some probable scenario, I hope it's low probability, that it could turn nuclear. President Putin is cornered, he's not winning, and, a cornered Putin is a dangerous man. So, we've got to be very watchful of what happens out there. In our own neighborhood, what we've seen is a prosperous country like Sri Lanka just going into economic collapse, and they've declared emergency. And it's interesting to note, really thoughtful people like former RBI Governor Raghuram Rajan talk about, look, this could easily happen in many other countries, many other states, including certain states of India. If that's not good enough, you have to think about the heat. And some of you are in Ahmedabad, so you know exactly what I'm talking about. This is the hottest April and May in 122 years that we have data for in India. And last week I was reading that the surface temperature in many parts of India crossed 60 degrees centigrade. I mean, it's just an astonishing number to think about, 60 degrees centigrade. And at that temperature, a human being can live for less than 1 hour if they're exposed. And of course, things are only going to get worse because just today a report came out that we were trying to limit the temperature increase, the average temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And now they've said there's no hope of that, and 1.5 degrees will be breached by 2025. Okay, then you could go on and on and on. The last 2-3 weeks, we've been reading about communal violence flaring up in many parts of India. So it's just the sheer volume of bad news. It's not all bad news, but when you add up all the stuff that's bad, it's a bit overwhelming. And you have to ask yourself, is this only temporary? Or is this an aberration? Or is this a fundamentally new phase in the world? And I think it is the latter. And the reason I think this is happening is we are caught in what is called a perfect storm. In weather terms, a perfect storm is when multiple storm fronts collide and they feed off each other, creating exponentially violent energy. And that's what seems to be happening right now. We see multiple trends colliding. So for instance, you see the technology and what it is doing to accelerate a bunch of things, create disruption, or the very high degrees of automation, so forth. On the other hand, we have the planet beginning to protest about our irresponsible and unsustainable ways of living and consuming. We're not just living through a climate crisis, we have created and caused the greatest mass extinction of species since the dinosaurs became extinct 65 million years ago. And I'll come back to the dinosaurs. In every country, within countries and between countries, the degree of polarization on ideas is like never before. The levels of inequality in the world are just staggering. I could just go on and on about all these trends which are colliding. And the worst thing about these trends is they reduce trust. You will see that amongst your own friends. Trust levels are declining, trust in government is declining. And what that means is our ability to come together to solve complex problems is reduced. So for instance, we know Indian agriculture needs reform. When the government tries to pass some new farm laws, there's no trust. So there's a lot of protest, and a year later it's rolled back. If we can't even pass this, imagine how we're going to solve more complex and more difficult problems. So I think we're in a very fundamentally different era of extreme change. And the problem with extreme change is the dinosaur issue. The cover of my book has a dinosaur, T-Rex, on it, who's also on this slide. And I use the dinosaur as a metaphor for the challenge of adaptation. When things change so suddenly, so fast, a lot of us, individuals, companies, organizations, countries, struggle to adapt. And, so this creates a binary outcome. Those who can adapt flourish. Those who are unable to adapt really suffer. And that's really the next slide. So Charles Darwin, who's the famous father of evolutionary biology, said this, it is not the strongest or the most intelligent that really flourishes, but the one that's capable of adapting to so much change. And that's why I wrote this book, because I think the consequences of not being able to adapt are very, very high. And it requires a whole new mindset, a whole different set of skills, and a whole set of approaches, which I unpack in my book. Now, what I want to do is set up just 3 or 4 of these ideas from the book as a way of stimulating conversation. Right? This is not by no means comprehensive, but for those of you who haven't read the book and may take some time to get to it, this is kind of useful set of ideas to think about. The first one has to do with the rapidly changing nature of work itself. What's happening is that the idea of a stable job leading to stable careers is going away. This is turning out to be an industrial era artifact, which is relevant now to fewer and fewer and fewer people. And I know Professor Kirti wants to explore this a little bit more. But why this is happening is essentially because companies are going through so much change that they're saying, look, we want to stay flexible. So we'll have a small core of permanent employees, and then we'll use contractors, do outsourcing, use freelancers, gig workers to do a lot of other tasks which can. And this is accelerated during the pandemic. So yeah, so that's one factor. The other thing that's happening is that as the performance bar is rising, companies are turning the screws on performance. They're also turning the screws on people as they get older. Once you pass 45 or 50, you're living on borrowed time. And of course, the problem is we're also all, at the same time living longer. If you're going to live to be 90 and you want to work till you're 75, good luck. Who's going to hire you after you're 50? So my advice in the book is very simple. Look, as fast as you possibly can, try and become independent, try and become self-sufficient. Sure, not everybody wants to be an entrepreneur or cut out to be an entrepreneur, but learn to at least be a freelancer or self-employed. And the best advice on how to do this is actually ancient advice from Aristotle, who said, look, do the best you can with what you're best at. And today I would add, and get paid for it. So what you want to be able to do is figure out what you're good at, what you love doing, and what the world is willing to pay for, and gradually find your way to the intersection of this. So, and a good example might be somebody who started engineering, but they really don't like engineering. They aren't particularly good at it, but in fact, they can make people laugh. So this advice would suggest that they should quit engineering and become a comedian. You're far more likely to be happy and successful as making a living as a comedian and helping people laugh than a mediocre engineer. So that's kind of the first advice. The second idea is about the importance of mindset. Mindset trumps talent. One of the things over the years, as you get older like me, you will sort of think about friends you grew up with, some of whom were astonishingly bright when you were young, or in your 30s, you thought they were going to change the world with their talent. And they fizzled out. Then you looked at some people who you knew who were completely mediocre. You thought they would amount to nothing, but they do astonishing things. And you wonder what happened here. And what happened here is very likely one of the major factors is mindset. What is mindset? Mindset is nothing more than the set of beliefs we have, the stories we have in our head, the assumptions we have about everything, about ourselves, what we're capable of, not capable of, what is success, what is failure, is Piyush here a good person or not a good person? Is the world fair or unfair? All these things, we have assumptions in our mind, but like an iceberg in water, most of these assumptions are in our subconscious. The thing is that these, we experience reality through the filter of these beliefs, okay? And therefore, these assumptions become our reality. And that's why I used this wonderful quote from Bill Gates. It said, look, what you believe is what you achieve. If you believe you're capable of something, you probably will come reasonably close to achieving it. But if you don't think it's possible, you won't even try. So that's the thing. In my book, I devote a whole chapter to this mindset issue. And particularly, I focus on something called the growth mindset versus fixed mindset, an idea that was popularized by Satya Nadella of Microsoft. I also talk about an abundance mindset versus a scarcity mindset. And the beautiful thing about mindset is it's reprogrammable. It is not hard-coded. So I give examples of how I've been able to work on my own mindset and change it and change my reality. So that's kind of a second useful idea. The third one is powerful, which is from time to time, it is crucial for each of us to take on new challenges, difficult challenges, challenges that are completely outside our comfort zone. And that's how we develop new skills, new capabilities, self-confidence, we develop the capacity to adapt, etc. So in my book, I call these crucible experiences. So when I look back at my life of, 35 years of working lives, nearly 60 years of, life itself, I can clearly look back and see these crucible experiences. For instance, I was 16 years old when I left the safety of my home to go live in a hostel in Bombay at IIT Bombay and, live with some tough people and also some of the smartest people I've ever met who were just way smarter than me and learned to compete. That was a crucible experience. Some years later, I went to America with $20 in my pocket and half a scholarship and lived the immigrant experience and learned to succeed in a new country. That was powerful, okay? Then some years later, for instance, I moved from the world of diesel engines and heavy manufacturing to Microsoft, completely new field and completely new company, and helped build Microsoft in India. That was a crucible experience. On the conference call here is Professor Biju Varki from IIMA Ahmedabad. And he and I served together on the board of Bank of Baroda for 3 years. I was the chairman. And that was a crucible experience because I'm not a banker. I knew nothing about public sector. And yet we had a nice challenge of trying to transform this 100-year-old institution. I learned so much in that process. When you look at your own lives, you'll find similarly there are crucible experiences. And sometimes it's not what you choose. Life chooses the experience for you. So somebody may be young when they lose a mother or a father, and suddenly your childhood is over and you have to grow up overnight, care for your younger siblings, become an adult. That's a crucible experience. Somebody loses their job and it's shattering, except they decide, okay, fine, out of necessity, I'll start a business. And then the business succeeds. That's a crucible experience. So it's important to take these on because these are the vehicles for growth. The fourth idea is a very, very important one, which is that of intangible assets. So, there are two trends which are colliding. One is we're living longer. Many of us on this call hopefully will live into our 90s. And at the same time, there's much more volatility, many more shocks like COVID and God knows what else. And so we're going to experience much more turbulence, many more shocks, have to make many more transitions. So how do you equip yourself for this? Well, one thing that's important is your savings, right? If you have a little bit of money put away, you can handle some of these shocks. If you don't, it becomes much more difficult. But more important than tangible assets like savings are intangible assets which cannot be measured or quantified. And what are these? They are, for instance, what is your reputation? Okay. How does, particularly your professional reputation, but also your personal reputation? Do people know you? What do they think of you? What are your networks like? Do you have any skills and expertise? What about close friends and family? Because they're the ones who'll stand by you when you go through these challenging times. Spirituality, your spiritual belief or faith, because to get through this period of time that I'm talking about, you better have some deep inner reserves that you can draw on. So, I don't think I was introduced in the full way, but one of the things is that I've done a fascinatingly different number of things, variety of things in my life. I've worked in 7 industries across public sector, private sector, social sector. I've lived and worked in 3 continents. And people sometimes ask, how do you make these transitions? And the answer is very simple. I have developed and cultivated my intangible assets to a much greater extent, much more intentionally than many of my friends and peers and colleagues. So that's an important idea. And the last point I want to talk about is leadership. I think leadership is the defining issue of our times. And I say this not because we're talking today at the Center for Leadership, because it is. If you think about where we are in the world today, at the planetary level, we have just an unbelievable number of problems, right? Including, most of all, a collapsing planet. You look at our country, we have any number of problems, from poverty to unemployment to healthcare and so many issues. You look around your own cities and communities where you live, there are lots of issues. You look in your own companies, it's not a lack of opportunity. It's not even resources. Mostly we're constrained by people who can actually, get things done, make things happen. So most of our problems today are persisting and not getting solved or getting worse, not because we lack know-how or technology or resources, but because we lack leadership. So what's the solution to this leadership crisis? I devote a whole chapter to that, which in my opinion is perhaps the most important chapter in the book, the most practical chapter in the book. And I say, look, I think we really need to rethink our ideas around leadership. Almost every one of the 84 people on this call probably confuses leadership with position, title, authority, formal power, right? So we say, oh, so-and-so, she's a vice president, and we talk about them as a leader. So-and-so is whatever, a minister, he's a leader. The truth is, they may be a leader, but most likely they're not. They're there either because they played safe, which is like in government, they refused to make any decisions, so they didn't make a mistake, or they played politics in the organization and rose to the top. But that's not leadership, right? So I think we need to stop confusing position and title with leadership and instead look at action, behavior. Leadership is about behavior. It is about how we act. It's a verb, not a noun. And therefore, it is about ordinary people like you and I doing things, some of which become extraordinary. So in my chapter on leadership, I give examples of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. For instance, I talk about a young boy called Rehan Sheikh, who's actually in the outskirts of Ahmedabad. His family lives inside now a municipal garbage dump, and you can imagine what life is like for them. And this boy is doing amazing things, organizing other kids, and he was a huge, huge force for his community during COVID. I talk about my neighbor here in Bangalore, a housewife called Padmashri, and a good friend. And she got frustrated with the garbage and that was not being collected by BBMP, the municipality. And she finally said, forget them, I'm going to do it myself. And over the next 7 years, she's become the leading waste warrior, the waste activist of Bangalore with huge, huge impact. So today, in the 21st century, I think that's the model we need. It's about leadership coming from anywhere, everywhere, every one of us stepping up and being the change we wish to see in the world, as Bapuji said. So this is one of the most crucial ideas. Let me stop here because I think I don't want to overrun, but I want to leave with the most important quote in my book. Look, we tend to radically underestimate what we are capable of, what we think others are capable of, and even more what we ourselves are capable of. When I look back at my life, I don't think I ever imagined that I would have done the things I did or be talking to you all today. Even 10 years and 5 years ago, I couldn't have imagined leading one of the world's most important climate change and energy transition efforts. And so I love this quote by Carol Dweck. That's her book on the right side. She says, a person's potential is both unknown and unknowable. It is impossible to foresee what you can accomplish through years of passion, hard work, and a little bit of good luck. So let me pause here, stop sharing, and let's get into some conversation here.
Hi, Ravi.
Hi.
Great to connect again and again. It's a delight, the conversations that we have been having over the past few days. It stimulated so much thinking within us, and we are really excited to hear about your views, your perspectives, and the insights that you're presenting to us. And our listeners they also seem very engaged. We have received some very interesting questions from them over the chat. And we will get into some of the specifics a little bit later. So one of the things that, resonated with me during our conversations is that we both share a love of storytelling. And, storytelling is something which has been a key part of human civilization. It is one of the core leadership skills creating narratives to communicate effectively is a core leadership competency as well. Could you share some of the stories about your leadership journey, especially those which have served as inflection points for you? Maybe about a failure, maybe about a transformational success. Over to you. Yes.
Yeah, look, I think you're making a seriously important point about the power of story, power of narrative. In fact, in my book, I quote the historian Yuval Harari, who says, look, human beings are not logical, okay? We are actually much more emotional. And if you want to convey something, you're far more likely to persuade a person by telling a story rather than by logic and facts and figures and so forth, right? So for instance, every politician, successful politician, is a master storyteller. If you look at our own prime minister, he's a master of narrative, and so too are most successful politicians. And the facts don't matter. People buy into the narrative. You think about a successful entrepreneur. In the beginning, what do they have? They have only a story, and spinning that story, they persuade somebody to invest in the company. They persuade a customer to buy a product which doesn't even exist. So this is a crucial skill. So yeah, I'm just using this to underscore what you said. Yeah, so in my own leadership journey, there are tons and tons of stories, because if you live 59 years, there's a lot of stories to tell. And of course, there are the obvious sort of success stories, but I want to focus more on the things which were not so successful, right? So, people read a resume and they say, wow, and all that. The thing to note is, yeah, resume is also a story. And it's a story that is biased. It's only a story of your successes, what you did well. It doesn't talk about the many things that you tried and didn't succeed at and failed and so forth. So yeah, for every success I have, there are even more things that didn't work. So for instance, when I left Microsoft, I was in 2011, I was clear about only one thing. I'm never going to be an employee again. I'm done with that, okay? But I didn't know what I wanted to do next. So I said, let me try many things, okay? And in the book, I actually write about that. And I call these micro experiments. Most of the things I tried didn't work out. So for instance, I wanted to do a startup selling cloud solutions to small businesses, SMEs. And we made a business plan. I hired a team, and I found an investor who was willing to put in 10 million. This is now 2011. So 10 million was actually a good amount of money. And then I realized, oops, the only reason I'm doing it is everybody else in Bangalore has a startup. I'm not really passionate about it. So I decided to quit before I started. I was going to bring Amazon to India in 2011-12, not as an employee, but as a partner, along with a famous Indian businessman. And so I introduced that famous Indian businessman who's going to put the money to Mr. Bezos. Next thing you know, it was quiet. And then I read that they had got together and I was left standing. So, Professor Varki will know that in our 3 years at Bank of Baroda, until year 2.5, it looked like we were not going to succeed. It looked dangerously like we would not accomplish what we were, had set out to do. Luckily, through a lot of hard work by a lot of people and some good luck, in the final 6 months, things came together. But it was a nerve-wracking moment. I could just go on and on about any number of things that I've started that didn't succeed, or succeeded to a much smaller extent than I had hoped. The thing I think this gets us into a conversation about what is success and failure. And I think that's a really important thing, because failure is a very dangerous word and it has a lot of stigma associated with it. But I think of failure as just an integral, necessary part of learning, growing, etc. And I give the example of a child who's learning to walk. And the child gets up and falls, gets up and falls, and then takes 2 steps and falls. If the child starts thinking of every fall as failure and stops trying, none of us would ever walk. Okay. So in life, I have learned to say, look, there is no failure except giving up. So I don't actually feel that any of the things where I failed to achieve what I had hoped to achieve or set out to achieve is actually failure. I think there were experiments. Some of them worked the way I anticipated, or even better. A lot of them didn't work out the way I anticipated, but I learned a lot. So long answer, but I hope I answered your question.
Thank you, Ravi. So,
Ketan, just one
please.
statement. Yeah. It reminded me of the words of the great Shah Rukh Khan, picture abhi baki hai mere dost.
Exactly. No, but that's such an important thing. Somebody say, oh, I'm 59 years old and, it's time to retire. I think that's such a bad idea. Many years ago, I read a sentence which I put on front of my desk. Today is the first day of the rest of your life. Okay. And so if you imagine today is the first day of the rest of my life, sure, we don't know how long that life is. And you say, everything I have done is only preparation for I'm going to do next, what is coming next. Wow. What an empowering idea. It doesn't matter if you're 35 or 75. Okay. Picture abhi baki hai.
Yes. Thank you, Ravi. Sorry, Ketan, I interrupted.
So following upon what Ravi was just mentioning. So Ravi, you have had some absolutely fascinating journey. From diesel engines to software development to banking, now to writing, and also currently we understand you are working on the problems of climate change. These are very unrelated areas, so to say. So, and also the question kind of covers what in the chat box, what Rakesh is asking, what Jhalak is asking also. So what are these intangible assets and what is your drive? What keeps you going? And also, how do you find this courage to take on these big problems?
Sure. So I think there are many aspects which are covered under your wonderful question. If you look at what keeps me going, I would say, and what connects these completely unrelated things, I think it is 2 things. One is curiosity. A lot of, when we are born, a child is incredibly curious about everything. A small child will go on asking questions, go on touching things and breaking things. And the parents are constantly saying, stop, stop, stop. And in the process, we end up losing our curiosity. And I think I have been fortunate that I managed to stay curious. And so I find everything interesting. And when I find something interesting, I pursue it. Okay. So that's one thing. The second thing is as I've become older, I want to make sure that my life mattered. I don't want to die feeling like I accomplished nothing. I only consumed, and I didn't leave the world slightly better. So I'm constantly looking for opportunities to make things a little better. Okay, understanding that, I have only modest capabilities. So that's where the drive comes from, the combination of curiosity and a passion to make some difference. Now, I think, as I said, the reason I have been able to attract very interesting opportunities is because of these intangible assets. One exercise I get people to do, and we won't do it right now, but I encourage the audience to do this tonight or over the weekend. Write down all the most important experiences in your life and make 7, 8, 9 of them. And you'll say it's this job, getting into that college, whatever it is. And then on the other hand, write a list of the most influential, important people in your life over the years. Okay. And then you look at each thing on this list, these 2 lists, and say, how did it happen? Did I make it happen? Or did that enter my life? And you'll find 8 out of 10 things are not because you were so damn good that you made it happen. Somehow the situation arranged itself and it came. So for instance, I look at how did I meet my wife? Okay. And well, we met through some friends who introduced us. That's the power of networks. So it is not magic. So the broader your network, the more likely you are to meet interesting people and bring opportunities to you. So how did the Global Energy Alliance come to me, right? Sitting in Bangalore. It came because through my networks and my reputation. This is why I say it's really important to cultivate those intangible assets. If you can cultivate those like a magnet, you keep attracting opportunities, and then you have to look at what do I say yes to and what do I say no to. So for instance, Microsoft came to me through a friend in 2003. Okay, I was sitting there making diesel engines and very comfortable. And then somebody said Microsoft. And I said, you've got to be joking. There is no less qualified person in India to lead Microsoft than me. Because those days, Katan, I wasn't even doing email. Okay, my secretary used to print email and give me a file at the end of the day. And then I would write up the replies and give it to him in the morning and he'd type it up. And I even said this to Microsoft in the interview and I still got the job. Now I had to make a decision. This is the story about courage. And I was very scared because, you know, you don't know anything. The company had a tough reputation. And 10 out of 10 people whose advice I asked said, don't do this. Nandan Nilekani said, don't do it. My wife said, don't do it. My mother said, what's the need to make this change? There was no support for this. So I was terrified. I was excited, but terrified, talking about fear. And then finally I said, look, I'm 40 years old. When I turn 50, which will I regret more? Oh, that I joined Microsoft and 2 years later I was fired for incompetence. Or I was so scared that I never took it. Then I said, forget it, I'm going to jump in, but let me frame it not as a career at Microsoft, but as a project. And this project ended up lasting 8 years. So when most people refuse to jump at opportunities because of this fear. And the thing to realize is, sure, there's a risk you may fail, but there's also a risk of doing nothing. Okay. So doing nothing has its own risks. And I prefer the risks of, you know, taking a jump and then you can always change course if it doesn't work out. And I want to remind people that courage is not the absence of fear, but the ability to operate despite your fears. I'm sure I'm very scared about this new Global Energy Alliance I'm leading. I don't know anything about energy. Okay, I know as much as anybody on this call, but I'm willing to learn. I'm willing to work hard. And so I'm fairly confident it'll be at least a moderate success. It may not be the big success. So yeah, that's how you do it. You stay curious, you stay alive, you take some risks, and then you work hard to make sure that, you know, things work out.
Thank you so much, Ravi. Thank you.
Ravi, you spoke about the courage and the courage of a leader. And it reminds me of the current president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. And he has emerged as one of the most significant leaders in recent times. He was a professional comedian and arguably did not have much leadership experience till he joined, politics. And now he seems to be facing the biggest, most uncomfortable challenge of his leadership journey in a very public way. And he also seems to be doing a decent job of it. I may be biased, but yeah, that is.
Oh, he's doing an extraordinary job. He's doing an extraordinary job.
So how does someone manage his or her fears, or the sense of inexperience or the self-doubts that come up when you're handling your leadership journey in such a public manner? So over to you. Yeah.
I think that's a wonderful question. There's a phrase that says, come at the moment, come at the man. It's the situation creates the conditions where we discover the leadership within us. So, not all of us are going to do something as dramatic as Zelensky. But as I said in my chapter on leadership, I talk about my neighbor Padma Shri, right? So this issue of garbage really bothered her. Okay, and finally she said, I'm tired of asking people and they don't do anything about it. So let me take it into my own hands. And she was afraid. When you start out something, you're afraid that people will laugh at you, or there's somebody will get angry saying, hey, what are you doing? Okay. And you may fail. And you do require some amount of courage to start taking the first steps despite those fears. The key thing is to start acting and take even small steps. Then from that, you realize, oops, nothing bad happened. In fact, other people were also upset about the same issue and they started joining me. Now I've got an army of volunteers willing to work on this, and you grow in confidence. And then you're willing to take on bigger issues. Okay, so that's how it spirals. You know, in our work with young people in UNICEF, so one of the things I do is I'm the global head for the youth initiative, youth mission at UNICEF. And we try and work with some of the kids from young people, 15 to 20 years old, from some of the poorest schools, from the poorest socioeconomic backgrounds, lower caste, you know, other religions, whatever. And they have no self-confidence. And the way we teach them leadership is by getting them involved in making small changes. And again, I write about it in my book. So you say, oh, what's a problem that bothers you? Somebody will say, look, the toilet in my school hasn't worked for 3 years. Okay, and they're really frustrated. And I complain to the teacher, nothing happened. I complain to the principal, nothing happened. Nobody cares. So we say, okay, well, how about you fixing it? Oh, how can I fix it? Okay, then we say, no, go find 2 friends and come back and we'll help you. And then gradually you help them fix the toilet. Suddenly they're transformed, okay? Because they did something, now they feel better about themselves. They were able to attract other people, other teachers are singing the praises. Now they're willing to take on bigger challenges. This is how we encourage leadership. So I think that's how it is. You start taking baby steps and you discover self-confidence. It's like any muscle. It doesn't matter how weak you are. If you go to the gym 3 times a week and lift some small weights, next week you're going to be lifting bigger weights. That's the leadership journey. So I started out with really small things as a foreman in a diesel engine factory in the middle of America. Nothing very great. But one day I took on the union in that factory in 1988, and I won. And that created a shock across the company because till then management was scared of the union. I was 25 years old and I took on the union and my workers supported me instead of their union. Okay. And I grew in self-confidence. That was the story I wrote in my application to Harvard Business School. And then I was ready to take on bigger challenges. And now I'm taking on the biggest challenge yet, which is climate change and energy transition. So I think that's the nature of the journey. I hope I have, and the point I want to say is there's a leader in every one of us. Okay, it's not something that you're born into or you're incapable of. Every one of us is capable of leadership. And in fact, the only hope for the world is many more of us step up and start providing leadership on different issues that we care about.
One of the things or one of the thoughts that tiny people is, I'm being watched.
Yeah.
I'm put in this role and I'm being watched and there's a crisis at hand, right? And so that pressure on oneself to do the right thing or to do a thing which would connect with most people. I'm sure you would also have experienced some such, event or episode in your life.
Totally. So look, leadership, particularly, in some of these big situations, is not easy. It is incredibly difficult. It is very, very lonely. Whether you do this or the opposite, somebody will criticize. So if you start worrying about how will people react and try to please X versus Y, you're going to fail. What you have to do is, in that moment, figure out what you believe is the right thing to do and go with your convictions and hope for the best and be prepared if you're wrong to change course. So for instance, the very famous episode that some of you will be aware of is there was a crisis on the board of Infosys when I was there. I was on the board and we ended up in a bad situation in 2016, 17. And the board became completely divided on what to do with the CEO and how to deal with a founder who was very upset. And, some people decided to jump off the board. So it's like rats fleeing a sinking ship. I said, you can't do that. Then some people decided to keep quiet. And I said, look, Infosys is the most iconic, important company in India. Okay. And if we go down in history as the board that allowed it to sink, what a shame. Okay. I'm not going to allow it. So I played a more active role. They made me co-chairman of the board, and I helped navigate that, steer that company to a much better place. And then I managed to bring Nandan Nilekani out of retirement and then eventually handed over that role to him. And the rest is fantastic. But it wasn't easy. It was very public. It was happening on the front pages of the newspaper. Not everybody thought I was doing the right thing or doing a good job. And you have to live with that. You have to do the best that you're capable of. Okay. And, history will be, whatever it is. In my case, I feel very good about it. So, and sometimes it won't work out also. And history will be a little sharp. But that's the nature of life. Did I answer your question?
Yes. Thanks, Ravi.
Yeah, I'm watching an extremely good series on Netflix. I cannot put it down. It's called Designated Survivor. Have you seen it? Okay, yes. All of you can go look at it. So what happens is some terrorist blows up the Capitol in Washington, and if the president, all the cabinet, all the Congress, Senate dies, except one fellow who's the designated survivor. This poor chap is completely unsuited for the job of leading the United States, that too through such a crisis. And each episode is describing the difficulties he faces, the self-doubt, the lack of confidence, the criticism, and how he handles it and eventually becomes very successful. That is the nature of these journeys. And the answer is, yeah, I think the objective is not to be popular, but to try to figure out what is the right thing.
Thank you so much, Ravi. So even through your book, you provide some excellent suggestions for individuals to design their life much more meaningfully, intentionally. But as leaders, sometimes you are also, it's part of your work that often you help people around you to support them design their lives intentionally. So I was just interested in knowing your thoughts on that what do you think, how leaders can, what different things leaders can do to support people around them?
Look, I don't know about advice I'd give. I think what has worked for me over the years is I've tried to encourage people. Okay. I'm probably not a very good manager, but I have encouraged and grown a prodigious amount of talent over these 35 years of working life. And as a result, there are any number of people who are grateful to me, okay? Because I saw in each person some potential, some spark, and I put some fuel on it, okay? I encouraged them to pursue their passion. I encouraged them to do something and take some risk. And I gave them confidence. And I think that is the single most important thing you can do, okay? I look at why I have been able to do some of the things I've done. It's because I found somebody who encouraged me, okay? The worst thing is you're trying to come up and somebody says, bang, stop it, bad idea, you'll never succeed. Who do you think you are? Okay, this sort of negativity shuts down the initiative. So I think as a leader, your most important role is to encourage people. Then comes, what you can do to support people. particularly when you're leading an organization, then to find ways to support people, to give them air cover and shield them when they make genuine mistakes. That becomes important. But really, having faith in people is by far and away the single most important thing that you can do.
Would you like to share some specific anecdotes, examples?
Yeah, I can share lots of it. I can share it from the workplace. For instance, yeah, so many years ago, this is now 1997, a young man called Ram Praveen wandered into my office, and he was from some lousy engineering college, and he had joined Tata Motors. But it struck me that he was a very bright guy. He asked intelligent questions. I was the MD of this Tata joint venture. So I said, okay, why are you wasting your time there? Come join me and work with me. So he directly came as my sort of executive assistant, and he started doing projects. And then he started doing really well. So I was incubating at Cummins 3 new ventures, and I said, be my person supporting them. And that did really well. So in 2002, I made him head of our power generation business, which was a $600 million business at that point. And he was about 20 something. Astonishing sort of leap of faith, particularly when you're talking about something 20 years ago. Okay, today, it's much more common for a 25-year-old to be building a unicorn. 20 years ago, that was not the case. He did a spectacular job with that. And then he went on to then become CEO of Andhra Pradesh Papers. Today is the CEO of Mahindra Logistics and doing a spectacular job. I was just with Anand Mahindra and he said, wow, what a find. Okay. So like that, I can give you 200 success stories. You just encourage. I didn't do much more than encouraged him, and the rest he accomplished. Padma Shri, the waste warrior of Bangalore. She had no self-confidence when she was starting. And I just have done nothing more than water the seed. Okay. And she's become a tree. What she's doing right now is something called Swachh Bekalu, which is trying to create a 7-star in your Swachh Bharat. There is a rating system with stars, and the highest is 7 stars. She's trying to get the first ward in Bangalore to 7 stars, has gone out, raised funding, blah, blah. I mean, she's like a tigress out there. Okay. So, and you can do this with very little effort. It's no great effort.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah.
So, Ravi, you spoke about Cummins, and we have Professor T.V. Rao with us.
Oh, okay.
And he has, he has shared a question from his side. I'm just going to read it out for you. Ravi, some of us who met you almost 25 years ago at Tata Cummins could see the glow in you and your leadership talent. What is it that you did not expect at that time?
Well, I certainly didn't expect that I would do most of the things I ended up doing. There was just no way I would have imagined one day building and running Microsoft in India, one day being, in such a crucial role in Infosys or Bank of Baroda. I would never have anticipated leading the Global Energy Alliance. I would not have imagined turning into a writer. Almost none of those things I would have expected. I would have hoped to rise to an important position, maybe the CEO of Cummins globally or something at best. So that is one thing. And so I'm surprised at, the flowering of interest and so forth. And that's why I say, look, we're all capable of extraordinary things. We just don't believe it ourselves. I would never have expected the extremes of human behavior. As you grow older, you see all manners of human beings and all varieties of human behavior, both the worst and the best. And yeah, I am just, very little surprises me anymore about that, but I didn't expect to see the great variety of that. I didn't expect to see the way the world would turn out. It has turned out to be a far grimmer world. Those years of, let's say, 1990 to 2015, okay, those 25 years were an extraordinary period for the world, an extraordinary period for India. There was, a rising tide, a lot of stability. We didn't realize what was happening to the planet. We all lived as though this game party would go on forever. And I didn't expect that it would turn out in the ways it has. So I could just go on and on and on, but it's wonderful to have Professor Rao there. It's a man I greatly look up to and admire.
We have some questions coming in from audience members around the turbulent times and the uncertain times that we are facing currently. There is also, a lack of clarity and a lack of visibility about the future, right? Coupled with this, there is a lack of confidence in our social systems, and there is a general despondency amongst our youth. In fact, I was reading some articles a few days ago. There is this, rise of the line slacks movement in China and US, where the current youth believes that maybe all they need to invest in is, sustaining themselves on a day-to-day basis, because any effort that they put in, any investment that they make is not going to take them to the next level. So why even make that effort? Just, engage in something which could sustain us on a day-to-day basis, and put your energies into something which is more interesting, more engaging, more energizing. So what would be your advice to people gripped by this uncertainty and this dysphoria on a day-to-day basis?
It's a great question. So this last Sunday, today is only Tuesday. On Sunday, I had a column in Times of India. And the column is called 5 Ways to Stay Sane in a Chaotic World. So to everybody who's interested in this, I'd say go read this TOI piece, because it made a lot of sense to a lot of people. I got a lot of feedback on it. And yeah, this is an extremely difficult and challenging time. And I don't think it's going to get better. There are times when it'll be much worse. Okay. And so we need to recognize the era that we're in and not wishfully hope for things to go back to the way they were, because they're not. And you can't hope that somebody will come and rescue you. You are your own rescuer. And so I've given some 5 suggestions which I use. So one of them is, say, look, there are a lot of things you can worry about and get depressed about. Okay. But you can't do anything. So, Stephen Covey talked about circle of control, circle of influence, and circle of concern. The only thing you control is yourself. You can influence a few things and people around you, but most things are in your circle of concern, and you can't do anything, and it just gets you down. So, this war in Ukraine, how unfair it is, how much suffering there is, how will it end? Is India doing the right thing by buying Russian, oil? This is all useless. Okay, you should be aware of it, but don't spend too much time worrying about it, because it's only going to get you depressed. Okay, climate change. Now here's the thing. I can't influence some things, but I can influence many things. So I can change my own habits. I can change the habits a little bit of the people around me at home or in the office. So the more you focus on your circle of influence and ignore things in your circle of concern, the more better you're going to feel. Okay. So that is definitely one thing I would say. Another thing I'd say is get off social media as fast as you can. Unplug all this Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and all this garbage, because they're designed to engage you in ways that spread hate and negativity, and it grips you. And so you're in this bubble and you're just inundated with biased information. And when you look around you, the real world is not as bad. No, it's raining out there. There's some plants. The people around me are normal people. They don't seem to be particularly evil, doing evil things. Okay. So unplug from all this media, social media, and just filter it out. So I would say that's a really important thing. I think the more you can find purposeful things which can absorb you, the better off you are. Okay. So if you're working, find a way to get absorbed in your work. Okay. Or whatever your interests are, because that idle mind is the devil's workshop. It gets into all this depression and all that. I think it's really important for every one of us to learn meditation to a certain degree, because what is meditation? Meditation is creating a certain space between your thoughts and yourself. Okay, this mind of ours has got what's called a monkey mind. It's constantly chattering. It's saying all sorts of, and if you start attaching yourself to a thoughts, it becomes very negative very quickly. If you just see that as a stream of consciousness and ignore it like clouds passing in the sky, and you learn to create a certain detachment, you're going to feel much more stable. So like this, I've given some tips. We all have to learn these coping mechanisms because we're in a very long and difficult period. But look, there's also a lot of beauty out there. There's a lot of opportunities out there. There's a lot of wonderful things out there. And you need to focus on those things, right?
Right. What you said about unplugging from social media and allowing the monkey mind to rest through some practices,
Yeah,
which can help you center, which can help you stay in the here and now. It resonates very strongly with me. It is something, and it is something that I like to weave into my life as well. And time and again, I, experience the temptation of going back and engaging with social media again. But then I have to remind myself, no, at what cost? What am I going to lose out in the process of, doing?
It's like a seriously bad drug addiction.
It is. Yes.
Yeah. So I notice we are past our appointed time. We can take a few minutes more if you like.
Yeah. I would like to bring in one more question, which is also emerging from the audience and from our internal team as well. Work has been an inherent part of, our identity, and it plays a big role in defining our life's purpose. And you've also spoken about purposeful and intentional living. The last few generations, especially post-World War II, had a well-structured meaning and purpose given to them in life. And a large part of it was derived from their work identity. As you shared in the beginning of our talk, these paradigms do not hold any relevance anymore, in the current world. It's a very different kind of world that we are living in at present. So what could the professionals of today be mindful of as they craft their leadership careers and their professional careers? If you look back, and if you were in your 30s and 40s currently, what would be the questions and challenges that you would be consumed with right now? And what would be your advice to yourself, who was a young adult at this point in time?
It's a great question. Work, what you're calling as work, is really, really important to us human beings. Because as you began to point out, it is not just about income and money. Work becomes a source of many, many important things. Identity. Who am I? Somebody asks you, who are you? And very soon in the conversation, you'll say, well, I'm a professor. I teach at IIMA Ahmedabad. That'll pop up within 30 seconds. Okay, because it becomes identity. How else do you describe yourself? It gives you some purpose. Going every day, teaching students gives you some purpose. Somebody else, they do something, they get purpose from that. That's where you learn. You pick up new skills. You're learning new things. You get the joy of accomplishing something. It's very important human need to feel like you're accomplishing something. You get a lot of satisfaction from that. It's your community. When you go to work, Suddenly you're with a whole bunch of people. Many of them are like-minded. You're all on this journey together. Some of your closest friends are people you work with. So work is very crucial for our mental health and well-being. So unfortunately, for this generation, very few of them are going to have stable jobs of the sort that we have enjoyed. And so the task of solving for each of these needs falls upon us. You just can't plug into one job and one institution and get everything. Okay, so you have to answer the question of identity. Who am I? Okay, what do I do that will give me joy and satisfaction? How do I learn? How do I get paid for something so that I can make, my living? You have to, so all this stuff has got disaggregated. Okay, and it's very, very, very painful. So in 2011, when I was leaving Microsoft, I said, I'm not going to take up a job again. And I had to go through the painful experience of solving for each of these. So back then in 2013, I wrote a series of articles in Economic Times. And one of them was titled, The Fear of Being Nobody. Okay. After being chairman of Microsoft India, suddenly to be a nobody is not easy. Your identity is lost. This is why a lot of CEOs in India never give up their job. Okay. No succession planning. One famous CEO turned 79 and he said, the man who can take my job has not been born yet. Okay. Because they're holding on to something desperately because they don't know who they are if they don't have this. So my advice to a young person today is, first of all, I think a job is still important as a launching pad for your professional life. That's where you learn some skills, you'll develop some disciplines and all that. But as fast as possible, develop the skills and self-confidence to be solo, to fly solo and be self-employed. Even if you end up with a company for 20 years, you should have the mindset that you're a consultant out here doing a series of projects. Okay. And you should very intentionally, as Professor Kathana has asked, think about who am I? Okay. And one of the most important questions in life is, as Mark Twain has this famous quote, there are 2 days that matter in our lives, the day you were born and the day you figure out why. Try and answer that question for yourself. Why was I born? Why am I here? If I meet my end and, what will make me feel satisfied that I lived a good life? This is the intentionality I want people to think about, not when they're 80, when it may be too late, but right from fairly early. Okay.
As you were speaking, this quote came to my mind, and this is something that you've referred to in your book as well. Narrative is leadership, and I just want to extend it, and leadership is narrative as well. So it's up to us what narratives we want to create for ourselves as we go forward, and the choices that we want to make as we go forward.
Absolutely. It's back to that thing about mindset. Right. Okay, its mindset is in part the stories we make up. So if the story you make up is, oh, well, I'm not important, I'm not capable of much, I'm just a whatever, housewife, I'm just a teacher. Okay, that's going to become self-fulfilling. On the other hand, if you make up a story of what you're capable of, you're going to strive. And I mean, I use that Henry Ford quote, whether you think you can or whether you think you cannot, you're right. So this narrative you make up for your own self and your life is just the most powerful. I see Ashank out here. Is that true? Can it be?
Yes, it is true. Yes.
Ashank bhai. Anyway, lovely to.
Hi.
He's an old friend, and I'm just so thrilled that.
Sorry, I got into some problem.
But it's fantastic to see you at your own center.
Good to see you at this center.
we approached first ICSE Bank. They said we are not funding education sector.
Thank you, Mr. Desai, for joining us also.
Then
We understand that you had some constraints, but we are really thankful to you for joining us for this conversation.
Yeah.
And it's nice that, you know, all of us got reconnected in this space again.
I know so many old friends that I got a chance to reconnect with today.
True. So, Ravi, thank you so much for this wonderful conversation on behalf of Kathan, me, and the team. It has been a really insightful and scintillating conversation. We look forward to many more such interactions with you, and we hope we remain connected as we go forth in our respective journeys.
Thank you.
Let us not leave Ravi so easily, huh? It's not very easy to catch him in any case, but still.
Not at all. I think you've made no effort to catch me, Ashank, because I'm always here.
I know, that I agree.
But no, today is a good reminder to catch up with old friends, and we will. I'm so glad there is a Center for Leadership at the Institute. It's just, as I said in my book, it's the defining issue of our times. And we need to change the ways we think about leadership in very, very fundamental ways. And the most fundamental way is recognizing everybody has the potential for leadership. So thanks, Ashank, for funding such a center. It's important work.
To you, Piyush, for the honors.
Yeah, good. Hi, Ashank. Good to see you here. And I would quickly wrap it up. What an exciting discussion for sure. And the leadership storytelling playbook is clearly global in nature, and the global leadership landscape, as we've learned today, truly looks promising. There are lots of challenges, lots of opportunities, a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world looking at innovative ways to, I don't know, new immersive technologies, new experiences, new business models, new leadership strategies, and what have you. And at the Ashank Desai Center for Leadership, we of course profess and harbor large ticket ambitions for active leadership inclusion. So excellent nuggets truly, Ravi, and thank you for giving that final statement when you said leadership is what really matters at the end of it all. So thank you very much, especially for speaking from the heart, for sharing those anecdotal stories from your life and being candid about failures as much as successes, and excellent moderation, both Professors Kirti Sharda and Professor Kathan Shukla. On behalf of the Ashank Desai Center for Leadership, it's a pleasure for me to thank you all. First and foremost, to the leaders out there, we've had yet another unprecedented turnout. Thank you very much for tuning in. I hope you had a great time. And in conversation with Ravi today were IIM Ahmedabad star professors, Professor Kirti Sharda and Professor Kathan Shukla. Thank you. We were, of course, privileged to have with us today the inimitable Ravi. Thank you, Ravi. You rock. And my personal thanks for agreeing to speak at the Ashank Desai Center for Leadership and Organization Development at IIM Ahmedabad. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening.